The memorial garden had become my sanctuary over the past 7 years. Every Saturday morning, I'd tend to the roses Evie loved so much, their pink blooms a reminder of her favorite color. The routine helped, even if the pain never really went away. I was pruning the last bush when movement at the garden gate caught my eye. A girl, no, a young woman, stood there, her hand resting on the iron latch. Something about her posture made my scissors slip, nicking my thumb. "Mom," the voice hit me like a physical blow. I knew that voice, even though it had deepened with age. My legs gave out, and I sank to my knees in the damp soil. "This isn't possible," I whispered, but she was already rushing toward me, her arms wrapping around my shoulders. She smelled of unfamiliar shampoo and something else. Fear, maybe. "I'm sorry," she kept saying, over and over. "I'm so sorry, Mom." I pulled back, my hands shaking as I touched her face. Evie's face, but older. My 11-year-old daughter, now a teenager. The scar above her right eyebrow that she'd gotten falling off her bike. The slight dimple in her left cheek. Details no stranger could know or fake.
How?
The word came out raw. "We buried you. There was a funeral. Your father." Dad lied. Her voice hardened on the word. "He arranged everything. The car accident, the closed casket, all of it." The world tilted sideways. I gripped her shoulders, afraid she might disappear if I let go. "Where have you been?" "Switzerland, mostly. At a boarding school." She glanced over her shoulder at the house. "Is he here?"
No.
"Business trip to Chicago." The words tasted bitter now. How many of those trips had been lies? Good. Evie helped me to my feet. "We don't have much time. I needed you to know the truth, but I can't stay long. He doesn't know I'm here." "You're not leaving." The words came out fierce, maternal. "You're my daughter." "Mom, please. It's complicated. There are things you don't know about Dad, about why he did this." I thought about the past 7 years. The grief counseling, the support groups, Jasper holding me through countless nights of tears, all while knowing our daughter was alive. "Then tell me," I said, leading her toward the house. "Tell me everything." She hesitated at the back door. "He'll know I was here." "Let him." Something cold and sharp was crystallizing in my chest. "You're home now. That's all that matters." "You don't understand. Dad, he—" She stopped, her eyes fixing on something behind me. I turned to see Jasper's car pulling into the driveway, 2 days early from his supposed business trip. Evie's hand tightened on mine. "He's with her," she whispered. Through the windshield, I could see a woman in the passenger seat, elegant, younger than me, her hand resting casually on my husband's arm. "Go upstairs," I told Evie. "Use the back stairs. Your old room is exactly as you left it." She squeezed my hand once more before slipping away. I watched her disappear up the stairs, then turned back to the window. Jasper was helping the woman out of the car, his hand lingering at her waist. 7 years of grief crashed against this new reality, transforming into something darker. My daughter was alive. My husband was a liar. And now I knew exactly what I had to do. I watched Jasper guide his companion through our front door, my hand steady as I filled the kettle. Years of muscle memory took over while my mind raced. The woman's perfume, something expensive and floral, drifted through the kitchen before they did. "Lila." Jasper's voice carried that familiar warmth, the same tone he'd used to comfort me through countless nights of grieving. "I thought you'd be at your garden club today." I turned, forcing a smile. The meeting was canceled. My eyes shifted to the woman beside him. She wore my daughter's death like jewelry, a designer bag bought with insurance money. Expensive highlights probably paid for with grief-fueled promotions. "This is Bianca," Jasper said, his hand hovering at her lower back. "She's a potential investor for the new development project." Bianca extended her hand. "Jasper's told me so much about you." I wondered if he'd told her how he'd helped me through the funeral of our very much alive daughter. "Has he?" The kettle whistled, saving me from saying more. "I thought we could discuss the project over lunch," Jasper said, loosening his tie. "Bianca has some fascinating ideas about A floorboard creaked upstairs. Jasper's head snapped toward the sound, a flash of something, fear, crossing his face. Probably just the house settling, I said quickly. It's been doing that lately. Would anyone like tea? Actually, Bianca glanced at her watch. I should get going. We can reschedule the discussion. Jasper's jaw tightened. I'll walk you out. I watched through the window as they spoke by her car, their bodies angled too closely for mere business associates. When Jasper returned, his smile had hardened. Want to tell me what that was about? He asked, closing the door behind him. What was about? The attitude. The cold shoulder to Bianca. He moved to the liquor cabinet, pouring himself a scotch. At 2 in the afternoon. I thought you were in Chicago until Thursday. Plans changed. He took a long sip. You're avoiding the question. And you're avoiding mine. I stepped closer, studying his face, the face I'd trusted for 20 years. How long have you been sleeping with her? The glass froze halfway to his lips. That's ridiculous. She's a business associate. Don't. My voice cracked. Don't lie to me. Not after. I caught myself, remembering Evie upstairs. After what? His eyes narrowed. What's really going on, Lila? Another creak from upstairs. Jasper set his glass down, moving toward the stairs. I grabbed his arm. We need to talk about the memorial garden, I said quickly. I'm thinking of changing it. Moving on. He stilled. You've never wanted to change it before. Maybe it's time. I met his gaze. Maybe it's time for a lot of things to change. Something shifted in his expression. A calculation, a reassessment. He'd always been good at reading people, at manipulating situations to his advantage. I could almost see him adjusting his strategy. Of course, he said softly, taking my hand. Whatever you need. You know I've only ever wanted what's best for you. For us. I fought the urge to pull away, to scream the truth in his face. Instead, I squeezed his hand and smiled. I know. I've always known that. He kissed my forehead, and I wondered how many times he'd used tenderness as a weapon. I have some calls to make. We'll talk more at dinner? I nodded, watching him disappear into his home office. Only then did I allow my hands to shake, pressing them flat against the kitchen counter. Upstairs, my daughter was alive. Downstairs, my husband was a stranger. And somewhere between these two truths, I had to find a way to protect one while destroying the other. Following Jasper had become disturbingly easy. After 20 years of marriage, I knew his patterns, his habits, the little lies he told without thinking. Today's was about a lunch meeting downtown. I watched from my car as he pulled into the parking lot of the Riverside Hotel, not a restaurant in sight. My phone buzzed. A text from Evie. Be careful. He checks everything. I'd left her at home with strict instructions to stay in the guest room, away from windows. The past 3 days of secret conversations and hushed planning had aged me a decade, but they'd also hardened my resolve. Jasper emerged from the hotel 40 minutes later, Bianca on his arm. They paused by her car, and I snapped several photos with my phone, my hands steady despite the rage building in my chest. Then something unexpected happened. They argued. Bianca gestured frantically while Jasper grabbed her arm, his face twisted in an expression I'd never seen before. I slipped out of my car, moving closer under the pretense of checking my phone. Their voices carried across the parking lot. You promised this would be over by now, Bianca hissed. The money is complicated, Jasper cut in. These things take time. The trust fund. The trust fund that supposedly died with your daughter? My breath caught. Evie's trust fund, the one her grandfather had set up, the one that would have matured on her 18th birthday, the one that disappeared after her death. Lower your voice, Jasper growled. Everything's under control. Like Switzerland was under control? Bianca yanked her arm free. She's not staying there forever, Jasper. What happens when? When what? They both turned. I stood there, phone visible in my hand. No point in hiding anymore. Bianca's face drained of color, but Jasper's smoothed into that familiar, reassuring smile. Lila, he said softly, this isn't what it looks like. Really? I held up my phone. Because it looks like you're discussing my daughter's trust fund with your mistress. Bianca's eyes darted between us. I should go. Stay. My voice was ice. I think we all need to have a conversation about Switzerland. She's delusional, Jasper said quickly to Bianca. Still grieving. You know how she gets about Evie. Funny you should mention Evie. I took a step closer. How is the boarding school? Expensive, I imagine. Especially with all those international fees. Jasper's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something dark and desperate underneath. You need help, Lila. I'm calling Dr. Matthews. No more doctors, Jasper. No more grief counselors or support groups or pills to help me sleep. I turned to Bianca. Did he tell you how he held me through night after night of nightmares? How he wiped my tears while our daughter was alive and alone in another country? I didn't. Bianca started, but Jasper cut her off. That's enough. He reached for my arm, but I stepped back. The trust fund. I pressed. How much was it worth? Enough to start your development company? Enough to buy her silence. I nodded toward Bianca. You don't understand, he said, his voice dropping to that soothing tone he'd used so often during my grieving. Everything I did was for us, for our future. No. The word came out sharp enough to make them both flinch. Everything you did was for you, but that ends now. I turned to leave, but Jasper's next words froze me in place. If you think you can prove any of this, you're wrong. And if you try, you'll never see her again. I looked back at him, really looked at the man I'd loved for 2 decades. That sounds like a threat. It's a promise. His smile was gentle, reasonable, terrifying. Think carefully about your next move, Lila. Some games are too dangerous to play. I walked away, my heart pounding but my step steady. He was right about one thing. This was a dangerous game. But he'd forgotten who he was playing against. A mother who'd already lost her child once. I had nothing left to lose, and everything to reclaim. The safe in Jasper's office had always been there, innocuous behind his collection of legal texts. I'd never questioned it before. Every lawyer had confidential documents to protect. But now, watching Evie pick the lock with practiced hands, I wondered how many other things I'd chosen not to see. Dad always used the same combinations, she said, fingers moving with surprising precision. Birthdays, anniversaries. He's not as clever as he thinks. The safe clicked open, revealing stacks of papers and a USB drive. My hands trembled as I reached for them, but Evie caught my wrist. Wait. She pulled out her phone, photographing everything exactly as it was placed. He'll know if anything's disturbed. I nodded, pride and heartache warring in my chest. When had my daughter learned to be so careful? What else had she learned while I thought she was dead? The documents told a story in cold, legal language. Transfer of funds. Offshore accounts. A private school in Switzerland with tuition payments traced back to shell companies. And something else. Property deeds in Bianca's name, purchased with money that disappeared from Evie's trust fund. He's been planning this for years, I whispered. The front door slammed downstairs. Evie froze, her eyes wide with a fear I never wanted to see again. Quick, I breathed, helping her return everything exactly as we'd found it. The safe closed with a soft click just as footsteps approached the office. Hide, I mouthed, gesturing to the closet. She slipped inside as Jasper appeared in the doorway. What are you doing in here? His tone was light, but his eyes weren't. Looking for aspirin. I forced a smile. Headache. In my office? The bathroom was out. I moved toward the door, but he didn't step aside. Funny thing happened today, he said, loosening his tie. Bianca called.
She's worried about you.
Says you've been asking questions. Have I? About Switzerland. He stepped closer.
About money.
About things that don't concern you. Our daughter doesn't concern me? His hand shot out, gripping my arm. Our daughter is dead, Lila. You need to accept that. Like you did. I yanked free. While you were building your empire with her trust fund? Something dangerous flickered in his eyes. You don't want to do this. Do what? Ask why my husband stole our daughter's inheritance. Why he? The slap caught me off guard. more shocking than painful. We stood frozen, both surprised by the violence of it. From the closet came the faintest gasp. Jasper's head snapped toward the sound. What was that? Nothing. I stepped into his line of sight. Just the house settling. It does that, remember? He studied me for a long moment, then smiled. That same smile that had once made me feel safe, now twisted into something threatening. You know what your problem is, Lila? You never learned when to let things go. He straightened his tie. I have a meeting. We'll discuss this later. After he left, Evie emerged from the closet, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry, Mom. This is all my fault.
No.
I pulled her close, feeling her shake. None of this is your fault.
But we need to move faster now.
He knows something's wrong. What are we going to do? I touched my cheek where he'd struck me, feeling a strange calm settle over me. We're going to talk to Bianca. But she's working with him. Maybe. I thought about the argument I'd witnessed, the fear in Bianca's eyes. Or maybe she's just another piece in his game. Either way, she's the key to proving what he did. And if she won't help, I looked at my daughter. So grown up, so scarred by the man who should have protected her. Then we'll find another way. He's not taking you from me again. The bruise forming on my cheek felt like a promise. Jasper had shown his true face today, and in doing so, he'd given me exactly what I needed, proof that he was capable of violence. Now I just had to make sure he never had the chance to use it again. Bianca's apartment was exactly what I expected: modern, expensive, cold. She opened the door with a glass of wine already in hand, unsurprised to see me. I wondered when you'd show up. She stepped aside, revealing a view of the city through floor-to-ceiling windows. He's not here. I know. Board meeting until 7. I entered, noting the packed suitcase by the door. Going somewhere? Depends on how this conversation goes. She took a long sip. You brought proof. I pulled out my phone, showing her the photos from Jasper's safe. Her hand trembled slightly as she swiped through them. The property deeds, she said softly. He promised those were mine. Like he promised to leave his grieving wife. The words came out sharper than intended. You don't understand. She set down her wine. I was supposed to be gone by now. New identity, new life. That was the deal. What deal? A key turned in the lock. We both froze as Jasper walked in, his expression shifting from surprise to rage in an instant. Well, he said, closing the door behind him. Isn't this cozy? The meeting, Bianca started, was rescheduled, his eyes fixed on me. You should have stayed home, Lila. Like Evie should have stayed in Switzerland? The silence that followed was deafening. Jasper's facade cracked, just for a moment, before smoothing over. You've lost your mind, he said gently. The grief, the stress, it's finally broken you. Stop. Bianca's voice shook. Just stop, Jasper. It's over. He turned to her, something dangerous in his movement. Nothing's over. We had a plan. Your plan. She backed away. Your lies. I never agreed to help you hide your daughter. But you agreed to take her trust fund. I watched his hands curl into fists. To buy properties in your name with stolen money. Money you promised was clean, Bianca shot back. You said it was from the firm, not. Enough. Jasper's shout made us both jump. Neither of you understands what's at stake. The investments, the developments, everything I built. With our daughter's money, I cut in, while I grieved for a child who wasn't dead. He moved toward me, but Bianca stepped between us. Don't. I've already called the police. The laugh that burst from him was chilling. With what evidence? Your word against mine? A grieving widow's delusions? Some photos that prove nothing. How about my testimony? We all turned. Evie stood in the doorway, the spare key I'd given her still in her hand. She'd grown so much in 7 years, but in that moment, I saw my 11-year-old daughter's determination in her eyes. You were supposed to stay in the car, I whispered. I'm done hiding. She faced Jasper. Done being your secret. Something shifted in Jasper's expression, fear, maybe, or recognition of what he'd lost. He reached for his phone. One call, he said, And certain people in Switzerland will make sure none of this matters. Already handled. Evie's voice was steady. The school's records, the fake passport, the bank transfers, I documented everything before I left. It's all with a lawyer now. If anything happens to me or Mom, it goes public. Jasper lunged forward, but Bianca grabbed his arm. In the struggle, her wine glass shattered on the floor, red spreading like blood across the white carpet. It's over, I said, pulling Evie close. The police are coming. The evidence is out. You've lost. He straightened his jacket, that familiar calm settling over him again. Have I? The smile he gave us made my blood run cold. Even now, backed into a corner, he looked like a man with one more card to play. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Whatever happened next would change everything, but looking at Evie, feeling her strength beside me, I knew we were ready. The truth was finally coming to light, and not even Jasper could stop it now. Could he? The police sirens grew louder, but Jasper's smile only widened. He reached into his jacket, pulling out a thick envelope. You really should have checked the safe more carefully, Lila. He tossed it onto Bianca's glass coffee table. There's always a backup plan. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were photos, dozens of them. Evie at her Swiss boarding school, me following Jasper to the hotel, Bianca's apartment building. All time-stamped, all recent. You knew, I whispered. You've known everything. Of course I knew. Did you think I wouldn't have people watching my own daughter? He loosened his tie. The real question is, who's been watching you? The apartment door burst open. Two men in suits entered, neither police. One nodded to Jasper while the other moved toward Evie. No. I stepped between them, but Jasper caught my arm. It's over, Lila. Evie's going back to Switzerland, where she'll be safe from your delusions. His grip tightened. The police will find a distraught woman who couldn't let go of her daughter's death, who dragged her husband's innocent girlfriend into dangerous fantasies. Tell them, I pleaded with Bianca. Tell them the truth. She wouldn't meet my eyes. I'm sorry. He has everything in my name. The properties, the accounts. Her voice cracked. I can't. The man reached for Evie. She backed away, but there was nowhere to go. Mom, she called out, fear cracking through her composure. Mom, please. Let her go. I struggled against Jasper's grip. She's just a child. She's my child too. His voice softened to that familiar, reasonable tone. And you're sick, Lila. You need help. The kind of help I've arranged at a private facility upstate. The second man produced papers, commitment forms. My signature forged perfectly at the bottom. You can't do this, I said, but the words sounded hollow even to me. Of course he could. He'd been planning this for years. The siren stopped outside. Real police this time, but they'd find exactly what Jasper wanted them to find. A delusional woman. A concerned husband. A frightened teenager who'd been manipulated into believing she was someone else. It's for the best, Jasper murmured, his lips close to my ear. In time, you'll understand. I'm protecting our family. You destroyed our family. I watched helplessly as they led Evie toward the door. Everything we had. I built everything we had. His mask slipped, just for a moment. The firm, the reputation, all of it. I wasn't going to let a trust fund and a teenage girl ruin it. The police knocked. Evie looked back at me, tears streaming down her face. In that moment, I saw both the teenager she'd become and the little girl I'd lost. 7 years of birthdays, scraped knees, first crushes, all stolen by the man still holding my arm. Say goodbye, Lila. Jasper's voice was gentle again, reasonable, perfect for the police about to enter. It's time to let her go. Again. The door opened. Uniforms flooded in. Questions started. Statements were taken. And through it all, I watched my daughter disappear for the second time in my life. But this time was different. This time, I knew she was alive. This time, I had nothing left to lose. As they led me toward the waiting ambulance, I caught one last glimpse of Jasper's face. He'd won and he knew it. His perfect life was safe. His secrets were secure. He didn't notice me palm Bianca's phone from the coffee table. Didn't see me slip it into my pocket as they guided me outside. Didn't realize that sometimes rock bottom is exactly where you need to be to start fighting back. The private facility's garden reminded me of my memorial roses, though these blooms were carefully manicured into submission. 3 days of observation had taught me the guards' patterns, the blind spots in the security cameras, and most importantly, the contents of Bianca's phone. I was pruning hydrangeas when Jasper arrived for his weekly visit, right on schedule. "You're looking better," he said, sitting beside me on the bench.
Dr.
"Harrison says you're making progress." I've had time to think. I kept my eyes on the flowers. "About Evie, about us." "You were right, I needed help." His hand covered mine, warm and familiar. "I knew you'd understand eventually." "I understand everything now." I pulled out Bianca's phone, watching his expression shift, especially after reading your emails. The warmth vanished from his touch. "Where did you get that?" "You should have checked my pockets before the commitment." I opened the email chain between him and the Swiss school. Interesting reading, especially the part about the trust fund transfers. "Give me the phone, Lila." "The police have copies already." A lie, but he flinched. Along with Bianca's statement, he stood, scanning the garden. We were alone, exactly as I'd planned. Bianca wouldn't. She did. I showed him the time-stamped video confession she'd recorded yesterday. After you transferred everything into your name, she realized she was just another loose end. Like me. "You don't understand what you've done." His voice dropped to that dangerous whisper I'd heard at Bianca's apartment. "The people I work with. The people you stole from?" I stood, matching his tone. "The ones whose money you laundered through Evie's trust fund?" Color drained from his face. "How?" "Bianca kept records. Insurance, she called it. Smart woman." I took a step closer. "She's talking to the FBI right now." His hand shot out, but this time I was ready. I caught his wrist, feeling the tremors of desperation in his grip. "It's over, Jasper. Evie's being brought back from Switzerland. The police are on their way. You've lost." "Lost?" He laughed, an ugly sound. "I built this life from nothing. Everything we had was built on our daughter's grave." I twisted free. "A grave you filled with lies while you played the grieving father." "I protected her." His composure shattered. "From the trust fund, from the responsibility, from becoming another spoiled heiress. You protected your access to her money." The truth felt like a weapon now. "And when she threatened to expose you, she was going to ruin everything." His shout echoed across the garden. "Coming home early, finding the transfer documents, threatening to tell you." I hit record on Bianca's phone, hidden in my pocket. Finally, after 7 years, the real story. "So you faked her death?" My voice stayed steady. "Sent her away and made me believe I'd lost my child? I gave her a better life. Private school, protection from the family legacy. You gave her trauma." I stepped back as guards appeared at both garden entrances. "And now you've given me your confession." He lunged forward just as the guards reached us. In the struggle, Bianca's phone clattered to the ground, the recording still running. "You can't prove anything," he snarled as they restrained him. "Actually," a familiar voice called from the garden entrance, "she can." Evie stood there, flanked by FBI agents, her eyes fixed on her father. Behind her, Bianca nodded to me. One final act of rebellion against the man who'd underestimated us all. "It's done," I said, watching them lead Jasper away. "It's finally done." Evie's hand slipped into mine, warm and real and here. "Let's go home, Mom." This time, when we left the garden, we left together. The memorial garden looked different in the morning light. I knelt beside the roses, gently removing the placard that had marked this space as a tribute to my lost daughter. Behind me, Evie's footsteps crunched on the gravel path. "We could plant something new," she said, kneeling beside me. "Something that grows wild." 6 months had passed since Jasper's arrest. The trial had been quick, his confession damning. The financial investigations were still ongoing, but we'd stopped following the headlines weeks ago. I was thinking sunflowers. I brushed dirt from my hands. They always turned toward the light. A manila envelope sat on the garden bench, delivered this morning from Jasper's lawyers. Inside was a letter I hadn't decided whether to read, along with signed divorce papers and documents returning control of Evie's trust fund. Evie picked up the envelope, weighing it carefully. Are you going to open it? I'm not sure his words matter anymore. She nodded, understanding in her eyes that sometimes seemed too old for her 18 years. I visited him yesterday. This was new. You didn't tell me. I needed to do it alone. She sat on the bench, her fingers tracing the envelope's edge.
He cried.
Actually cried. Said he thought he was protecting me from becoming spoiled by the money, by the responsibility. And what did you say? That he could have trusted me. Trusted us. She pulled out the letter. Maybe you should read it. I took the paper, feeling its weight. 7 years of lies condensed into a single page. The words blurred together at first, then sharpened. I convinced myself I was protecting our family, but I was protecting my own fears. The truth is, I was afraid of losing control, of watching our daughter become something I couldn't manage. In trying to prevent one future, I destroyed another. I'm sorry. Do you believe him? Evie asked softly. I folded the letter, tucking it back into the envelope. I believe he believes it. But sometimes sorry isn't enough. A car pulled into the driveway, Bianca's sleek sedan. After her testimony helped convict Jasper, she'd used her share of the recovered funds to start over, helping other families navigate financial fraud cases. Ready, she called from the car. The realtor's meeting us at 10. We were selling the house, looking for somewhere new. Somewhere without memories in every corner. Just a minute, I called back. There was one last thing to do. I handed Evie a trowel. Together, we dug a small hole among the roses. I placed the envelope inside, letting the garden that had held my grief now hold these final pieces of our old life. Mom, Evie's voice was quiet. Do you ever wish I hadn't come back? That you'd never known the truth? I pulled her close, feeling her heartbeat against mine.
Never.
The truth set us both free. As we covered the letter with earth, I thought about Jasper's words about protection. He'd been right about one thing. The truth could hurt, but lies could destroy, and the space between those choices was where real love lived. Come on, I said, standing. Let's go find our new home. We walked to the car together, leaving the garden behind. The roses would bloom for someone else now, and that was okay. Our story wasn't about the flowers anymore. It was about what grew in their place. Bianca smiled as we got in, passing me a stack of house listings. Ready to start over? I looked at Evie in the rearview mirror, saw her watching the garden fade from view. Some people might call this revenge, this quiet rebuilding of a life Jasper tried to control. But as I watched my daughter turn toward her future, I realized this wasn't about revenge at all. It was about redemption. And sometimes, that's the sweetest justice of all.